Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Doing good.
Good.
A little sunburned, I guess, but
How was your trip?
oh, it was great. I had never been to Glacier National Park, and it was pretty incredible.
I bet. I bet.
And it
Yeah.
was kind of interesting because it was super cloudy the first day that we got there.
Hmm.
And then as we, as the trip uh continued, it got less and less cloudy. So you see like, whoa, there's a mountain there. There's another mountain there. That was fun.
It's like a gradual unveiling of, oh, look at this. Yeah, that's cool.
Yes.
That's cool.
Rob should be here in a minute.
Excellent. Well, we may be it because I just saw that I had seen that Paul is out. I think Tony's traveling. So we'll see. We'll see who we have. But good
Yeah.
morning, Miriam. I got to see Miriam and Aleem yesterday. I went to Tuscaloosa for a panel discussion that I was part of. So I got to stop in and see them in person.
Neat.
So this was it was the Blackburn Institute, which I understand Rob is part of. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, that's neat.
yeah.
What was your talk about?
It was on psychedelic science, on psychedelic assisted therapy, and we had two other therapists and myself, and then a lawyer. So it was a really good, mix of perspectives and topics. So yeah, it was, and we covered a lot in an hour and a half. So
That sounds awesome.
It was a good event.
We went to a water park yesterday.
No, I saw your post. So this is a
Yeah.
city-run water park.
I could not believe it because I'd driven past it before and I was like, what is that? Because
Yeah.
there's like a big water slide. And I think for
Yeah.
a while they were doing some repairs and like upgrades or something. But
Okay.
no, you go to like the City of Renton website and it's the Henry Moses Aquatic Center. And
Wow.
like anybody, you just pay like a one-time fee and you can go for the day. Like,
Oh my
and you
gosh.
can reserve a slot and, it's awesome.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, oftentimes it's like, oh, cities, we can only pick up your trash and pave your roads, and that's it. Like, we can't do any fun things. We'll give you a library, but we're not going to actually try to improve people's lives or let them have fun. It's going to be.
It's like
sorry.
there's a Bluey episode where they talk about, trust being, the basis for everything around us, power lines, roads, libraries, like, and I think that it just, if people would trust and say like, okay, if I give my money to the city, we can all enjoy this stuff,
right?
But yeah, there's a lack of trust, I think.
That's socialism.
It's like,
yeah,
it's a park,
maybe I should start watching Bluey, because some of the things you guys have shared, I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Goodness.
It is a wonderful show.
So what's it on? Who owns it, or what channel is it on?
Disney Plus.
It's Disney Plus. Okay.
Yeah. It's actually an Australian show. But Disney airs it in America.
Interesting. Yeah. I should definitely tune into Bluey, it sounds like.
They have, like, there was an article, I think The Atlantic wrote an article about it like not too long ago, talking about how it sort of takes a very nuanced view of some complicated things. Sort of a very grown-up take on some kids' issues. It's not just very didactic. It's sort of
Well, when I think back, like, I mean, just things like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street and stuff that most people look at that and say, yeah, that was good kids programming. And the most of what they were teaching shouldn't be controversial.
Seriously.
And yet that's it's a lot of the pushback is things like kindness and diversity and appreciating people's differences and not being afraid and trust, basic human decency stuff is controversial these days. So
yeah.
All right, I'll stop being cynical and gripey for a minute. Yeah.
We need some like grown-up versions.
Gosh, do we ever? Yeah. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning.
How are y'all doing?
Doing okay.
Good.
Sorry, I had Zoom updates installing.
Oh yeah, that's well, I think we're it today because I know Tony's traveling. Paula said she's out. And
I don't see any chat.
Oh, let's see. Is the chat?
Oh, there we go. I think. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, Miriam said hi earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like they moved it around. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. When they update, they then I start getting crotchety, like newfangled something or other. It's just, anyway. So why don't we split up this way? Rob, do you mind being liturgist and Miller can be the voice of the people?
I can do that.
Will that work? And then let's see if yeah, let's just do it that way. And then Miller, if you don't mind taking the New Testament passage, and Rob, if you can take the Old Testament passage, which is Exodus. It's long today, so
okay.
FYI. All right. let me share up the liturgy with y'all. Here we go. And whenever you're ready.
All right. Sorry, I am futzing with my preferred screen arrangement to do all this. Here we go.
All good.
All right. Tomorrow, August 28th, marks the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. In addition to Reverend Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech, participants in this civil rights rally witnessed songs by Mahalia Jackson and a speech by Josephine Baker. On this day in 410, the Visigoths finished sacking Rome. And on this day in 1991, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were recognized as independent countries by the European community. Moldova also declared independence from the USSR. Greetings. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
as beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
Draw near and let us break the bread of life.
The responsive reading today comes from Psalm 124. If the Lord hadn't been for us, let Israel now repeat.
If the Lord hadn't been for us when those people attacked us,
then they would have swallowed us up whole with their rage burning against us.
Then the waters would have drowned us.
The torrent would have come over our necks.
Then the raging waters would have come over our necks.
Bless the Lord, because he didn't hand us over like food for our enemies' teeth.
We escaped like a bird from the hunter's trap. The trap was broken, so we escaped.
Our help is in the name of the Lord,
the maker of heaven and earth.
So our first reading comes from Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, and continues into chapter 2, as far as verse 10. Now a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. He said to his people, "The Israelite people are now larger in number and stronger than we are. Come on, let's be smart and deal with them. Otherwise, they will only grow in number. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land." As a result, the Egyptians put foremen of forced work gangs over the Israelites to harass them with hard work. They had to build storage cities named Pithom and Ramesses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they grew and spread. So much so that the Egyptians started to look at the Israelites with disgust and dread. So the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. They made their lives miserable with hard labor, making mortar and bricks, doing field work, and by forcing them to do all kinds of other cruel work. The king of Egypt spoke to two Hebrew midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. When you are helping the Hebrew women give birth and you see the baby being born, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, you can let her live. Now the two midwives respected God, so they didn't obey the Egyptian king's order. Instead, they let the baby boys live. So the king of Egypt called the two midwives and said to them, "Why are you doing this? Why are you letting the baby boys live?" The two midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're much stronger and give birth before any midwives can get to them." So God treated the midwives well, and the people kept on multiplying and became very strong. And because the midwives respected God, God gave them households of their own. Then Pharaoh gave an order to all his people: "Throw every baby boy born to the Hebrews into the Nile River, but you can let all the girls live." Now a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river while her women servants walked along beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." Then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed, "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I pulled him out of the water."
Matthew 15, 10 through 28. Now when Jesus came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the human one is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." He said, "And what about you? Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then Jesus replied, "Happy are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because no human has shown this to you. Rather, my Father, who is in heaven, has shown to you. I tell you that you are Peter, and I'll build my church on this rock. The gates of the underworld won't be able to stand against it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Anything you fasten on earth will be fastened in heaven. Anything you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven." Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anybody that he was the Christ. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God. In her speech at the March on Washington in 1963, Josephine Baker said, "I do not lie to you when I tell you I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens and into the houses of presidents, and much more. But I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee, and that made me mad. And when I get mad, you know that I open my big mouth. And then look out, because when Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all over the world."
Thank you all for getting us started in worship this morning. Thanks to those of you who are joining us, whether you're streaming, whether you're on Zoom or streaming on Facebook or YouTube. We're going to go into a time of prayer. And if you're watching, you're welcome to join us in prayer. If you want to put a prayer request in the comments, I will keep an eye on YouTube. Would one of you mind keeping an eye on Facebook to see if anyone posts prayer requests?
I've got Facebook up.
Gracias. Yes. Also, if you're streaming, if you don't mind just clicking like or type where you're watching from, that gives us a record of your attendance with us today. So let's pray to God. Gracious God, we ask that you move our hearts with the smooth flow of your grace. We ask that like a river that you would let your love run through us, that we would be carried by the currents of your love. We ask that you stretch out our hearts with your strength, just the way you stretch out the sky over the earth. Let our love be expansive. And help us to see the world and our neighbors with the same tenderness that you do. We lift up to you the concerns of our hearts. We are so aware of all the things that are going wrong. We're weighed down by anxieties and worries. So we lift up to you the constant state of war that the world is in, whether that's in Ukraine or in Africa, or whether that's in interpersonal war, conflict between families, within families. We lift up to you all those who are struggling today with illness of one kind or another, with dis-ease. God, we ask you to bring us all into a state where we can enjoy the river of your grace. We ask you to baptize this world into a new way of being, a way that is free of selfishness and anger, a way that is full of restorative justice. We lift up to you situations that are close to us, people and situations that we're aware of, and we name them now before you. I invite those of you who are praying with us to share.
Gratitude that my mother's cataract procedures went well.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for safe travels.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the families and victims of those involved in the shooting in Jacksonville.
Lord, hear our prayer. For transgender people and their families.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For
Fire victim families. Fire victim families who have not found their loved ones.
Lord, hear our
Lord,
prayer.
hear our prayer.
For all those recovering from natural disasters.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those struggling with access to physical and mental health care.
Lord, hear our prayer. For those suffering from the bad air quality.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those that we've named and those who are unnamed, we give you thanks that you hear our prayers and that you answer. And we know that when our words fail, that we can often turn to the words that your Son taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I think probably most people have heard some version of the story that we read today. Either they may have you may have seen the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston as Moses, which is plays on reruns occasionally on, I was going to say on cable. No one has cable anymore, but you see it occasionally playing. Or the animated The Prince of Egypt, which is actually one of my favorite movies. It has a banging soundtrack. I mean, really phenomenal stuff, and I think it was pretty well done. Both of those movies, I think it's interesting, take a little bit of a departure from the story here, in that when Moses realizes he's a Hebrew, it's like a big reveal. In both of those stories, he discovers that he's not actually Egyptian, and it's oh my goodness, my parentage is different than I expected. In the story, there's no doubt Moses always knew he was a Hebrew, right? I mean, the Pharaoh's daughter doesn't immediately adopt him into her household. She sends him back home, and he grows up with his mama until he's of an age when he can come join Pharaoh's household. And from that point, he's in a position of privilege. So really different dynamics going on in the Bible story and in those stories. They're both wonderful movies. Don't get me wrong, but the Bible story is interesting. I also think it's important. This story is just foundational for the Jewish people. This Passover, which happens every year, they retell the story. We were slaves in Egypt. And it's not our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. It's we were slaves in Egypt. So the way they tell the story, they're together with their ancestors. They're recalling the story of liberation, and that this is absolutely foundational to Jewish identity. Also, not coincidentally, it's a story of genocide, right? We survived genocide. We are the ones who survived. And I think about all the similarities this story has with, for example, the stories of indigenous people in America. Bishop Stephen Charleston has a book. He's an Episcopal priest. He's also an indigenous elder. Has a book coming out called "We Survived the End of the World." I'm really looking forward to it, because a lot of us who are kind of struggling with climate grief and kind of the apocalyptic narrative that we're living in right now need those words of wisdom from an indigenous elder saying, we survived the end of the world. This has already happened to us. The world has already ended. And this is kind of the we're living in a post-apocalyptic environment, right? And this is an ancestral memory. This is a part of this is a remembering of how things were before. The retelling, the history. All of this is important for human beings to survive, for us to grow as a species. I think it's fascinating. There's been a lot of anthropological research on we're one of the few species that has grandparents. We live well after we're able to produce children, in part so that our species can keep passing on wisdom. Our grandparents were our first libraries, right? They're the ones that taught us how to make food and how to survive. And they also shared wisdom, like, you don't want to mess with that person, or you want to handle relationships this way. And the idea was that because we are social creatures, and we're not just baby producing machines, that we are passing on wisdom. We're not just passing on our DNA, right? We're passing on consciousness. We're passing on awareness. This is part of who we are as a human species. And that idea is already rooted in Native American cultures, and it's very much rooted in Jewish culture. Telling the story, remembering history, using ritual to pass on this knowledge is hugely important in those cultures. Now, I know now we have books and we have the internet and we have other ways of storing information, but we're also aware of how much misinformation we get. So I think that's important for us to honor and value the human aspect of the passing on of knowledge, of the sharing of history and wisdom, the sharing of story, firsthand stories, right? Eyewitness accounts. So this story begins with forgetting. A new king arose who did not know Joseph. That's one line, and it sets the tone for the rest of the story. All of this happens because someone forgot history. Now, I don't probably need to tell you that we are in that moment right now. Because as today or tomorrow is the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights March on Washington, that generation, the people who witnessed that firsthand, those people are passing away. There are fewer and fewer of them each year. The people who were the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, there are fewer of them every year that we go on. And so now is the time that people like Ron DeSantis are trying to eliminate the teaching of African American history in schools. Because the idea, it was pointless before this generation started disappearing, because there were always people who could tell the story, right? But the idea is, okay, we're going to try to create a new generation of people who deliberately have forgotten the story of liberation, of who we are. Now, I'm speaking as a white middle-aged guy, and I'm telling you that just as I need this story of liberation of Jewish people from 2,700 years ago to be taught African American history in order to be a complete human being on this planet. I need to know Stephen Charleston's history in order for me to be a wise human being who lives on this planet. Anything that I deliberately forget, anything I choose not to learn, is a moral failing. And this story captures that. A new king arose who didn't know Joseph. Thus, all this other garbage that happened, right? So that's how this story's set up. Now, the nice thing, I think, in the story, another kind of important liberation aspect, is that the people who save this story, the people who are the heroes of these first two chapters, they're all women. And that's not an accident. All right, it's repeated, right? The idea is we're going to get rid of all the baby boys. There's clearly a gender thing going on here in the story, and the people who wind up saving the day are the Hebrew midwives and Pharaoh's daughter, and that there's this strange alliance across difference between Egyptians and Hebrews that results in this next generation being able to survive and then liberate the country 80 years later. All right. So, I mean, the idea is this gets things rolling. Moses doesn't actually become a leader for another 80 years. This is a generations long working out of things. So I think as I imagine Jewish people telling this story again for generations and generations, with the idea that God's in the long game, and that forgetting is a sin, and that women are the ones who save this culture, and that should basically inform everything, all of their theology, right? All of the ways they think about themselves in the world. I also don't think it's a coincidence that the midwives are the ones who save the boys, because midwives passed on knowledge from generation to generation. It was an apprentice mentor kind of relationship. And so stories are being shared, wisdom is being shared from midwife mentor to the next one, right? And so they're the ones with the ancient knowledge who are actually saving the day in this story. It's a wonderful story. I think it has so many parallels to what we're experiencing right now in this moment. I resist trying to boil it all down to one thing, one trite little thing. Like, stick to it. God will see you through. I think this story speaks to everything that we're going through, right? The teaching of history, the operation of empire, the way that generations pass on knowledge, who is actually active in saving and liberating people. Moses, although he's a big leader and he's the one that you hear the books of Moses, and he's the reference point in Jewish history, he wouldn't exist if it weren't for Shiphrah and Puah and Pharaoh's daughter, if it weren't for the actions of these women, right, in saving the day 80 years before he was ready to come on the scene. So I'm just going to pause there because I think it's a very rich story and there's a lot to dig into, and I would love to hear your reactions to it. Again, if you're streaming on Zoom or YouTube, if you would like to share any of your own perspectives on this story, would love to hear it. And I know if Tony were here, he would go, okay, I'll start. And then.
I mean, I was going to try to defer, but I mean, Miller, if you're still thinking, I hate to be the middle-aged white guy on the scene and be like, I'll talk first.
Go ahead, it's fine. I'm thinking.
The connection, the historical connection to Joseph there, and then the forgetting really jumps out at me, right? I mean, the whole idea there of like, well, this people group, they were immigrants to Egypt in a hard time, right? And then the savviness of Joseph having helped Egypt, get through a hard time or prepare for a hard time, so that they were able to accept these refugees, right? Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, these folks go on living in Egypt. They become part of this society, right? They're effectively, they go from being refugees to immigrants. They are good citizens, right? Like this is a multicultural society for a period. But then there's this, act of forgetting, mm-hmm. where, oh no, now we're going to draw the line differently, right? Our circle of trust has shrunk. It's no longer we, the multicultural people of the land of Egypt. It's we, ethnic Egyptians, who can be trusted. And so now these interlopers who have come in here, they're so numerous. This is scary. This is bad, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, think about the cognates to that. I mean, whether we're talking about paranoia over immigration in the United States, or whether we're talking about paranoia over the demography of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. Where people are very, very concerned about the Arab population, and well, how there's this whole struggle over Israel as a democracy, Israel as a Jewish state. It's a mess. Mm-hmm. And so this whole, like, it's such an object lesson. I feel like the story is such an object lesson in what happens when you let that circle of trust shrink. Mm. And I mean, I think that's interesting to me as a way of understanding exactly what's going wrong in the act of forgetting, right? What we've forgotten is how we came to trust each other. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
I think using the word forgot is sort of making me itch a little bit, because I don't think that king who didn't know Joseph just didn't know Joseph. I'm quite certain that person was aware of what happened, but this person also had opinions about how Egyptians and the Jewish people were interacting in society, the employment probably, because I look back at history and other incidents of like forgetting, because you say I forgot, it's kind of an excuse, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, but it's more of an ignoring because I think of like the Indian schools in America, where we purposefully took these people from their homes and educated them in like white people ways to break the cycle of their culture, and misinformation in Nazi Germany. And I firmly believe what's going on in Florida and other states that are removing critical race theory and all sorts of things from their curriculums. It's more intentional than forgetting. Yes, they want other people to forget. Oh, and then like right after was it the 20s or the 50s? I read an article about this woman in the archives in Montgomery who took great offense at the truth being taught about the Civil War in Alabama schools. So she and like the Confederate, what was it?
Daughters of the Confederacy.
Daughters of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Worked together to create these like curriculums that sort of like papered over, and created the whole states' rights narrative, and it's not about slavery.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So there's an intentionality here. It's a weapon. It's not just like something that you have to worry about happening, like to yourself. People wield this sort of thing.
It's not like you forgot your car keys or I forgot where I set my coffee down. This is more, as you said, it's weaponized forgetting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're making me think about, it's really important to understand the intentional act, the series of intentional acts, right? That this isn't, it slipped my mind. This is the strategy of memory holing things, right? We're going to erase history. We're going to make people forget because we remember, right? That's the thing. The person who's making these choices to promulgate, oppression is very much remembering. That's like you said, it's they want other people to forget. And it really puts me in mind, I mean, to sort of loop back to the idea of trust, right? Like, okay, this is slightly roundabout, but I remember hearing Miller's mom talk about a public pool getting shut down and filled in with cement in response to integration. Rather than integrate the pool, rather than share the pool, we will make it go away. Right? So I mean, it is a literal act of erasure. Like you filled a large hole in the ground that was meant for kids to have fun in with cement. And then I can contrast that with the experience we just had yesterday. We took Kira to a water park that is actually operated by the parks department of our city, where there is a large swimming pool, a splash pool for kids, a wave pool, a lazy river, and 2 26-foot tall water slides.
That's amazing.
Like legit exciting water slides.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about all the people I've known who had backyard pools, varying sorts. You can have an above ground pool, an in-ground pool. I've known people who have very nice in-ground pools with like little grottos and even a small water slide. Like, if you've got money, you can make a really nice little bubble for yourself, but you have to be really crazy, stinking rich to have 26-foot tall water slides in your backyard.
Right.
And all that we have to do here in our city to have that is to be willing to share it.
Yeah.
And I contrast that with just filling a single pool with cement. Like, so this act of erasure, like all in the name of, it's like it's a refusal to trust. Maybe that's what it's really coming to, is it's like, no, I don't want to trust you. I don't care about the past. I don't care about history. I don't care about the community we have. I do not want to trust you. Yeah.
And it does feel like almost like cutting your nose off to spite your face to, anyway. I'm sorry, Miller. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like combining the trust and, forgetting / ignoring narrative. Like there is a lack of trust. Like if you give people information, they might see it the same way you do. They might not, but there's this lack of trust that, your narrative is going to stand, possibly for, with reason, because it's illogical. But yeah, there's a trust thing in giving people the full story. Because I mean, everybody has those like family things that nobody talks about. Like, I think, what was it? Oh, well, so my mom's grandfather was basically illegitimate. So nobody talked about that. And somebody wanted to go and do like a big genealogical study of the family, Some of them wanted to do it possibly to join like the Daughters of the Revolution or something like that. But they and the whole like older level of the daughters of the grandfather like freaked out, like, don't do that. No, because I mean it's just a story, but they didn't trust anyone to have the story.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of the way that in the South during slavery, they wouldn't actually, there was a slave Bible which had Exodus edited out of it along with some other passages, right? So the idea was we want these people to be Christian, but we don't want to give them the whole Bible. So they would, and that's why slaves weren't allowed to have their own churches either. They were supposed to come to the master's church, and that they were only allowed, if they could read at all, they were only allowed to have this edited version of the Bible, because you don't want to entrust someone with a narrative like this. Now it's interesting though, because even the slave masters had this narrative, but it didn't like cause them any pangs of conscience that as they were reading through this, like, oh gosh, maybe we should rethink this whole idea. I mean, we can insulate ourselves from the effects of the story. We can interpret it in certain ways, obviously, but I do think I like what you're saying about the combination of the trust with the story, right? Like, do I entrust this story to anybody? It's an interesting dynamic. And Rob, you touched on the anxiety that was there. Oh, there's more of them than of us. We're afraid of how they were going to treat us, so we're going to get them before they get us. Is kind of the attitude, which again is paralleling today's situation. We know demographically that white people ain't going to be the majority forever. Thank God. But there are a lot of people who are very anxious about that, and they want to go ahead and get the history changed now before something happens down the road because we're afraid of losing power. I mean, it's the same stuff that they were dealing. It's in this narrative, this 3,000-year-old story. It blows my mind. Anyway,
like so much of my adult life has been like uncovering these facts that like I didn't have, growing up, be it because I went to a Christian high school that used like the first part of their history text was Adam and Eve. And obviously a lot of other nuances were covered up, but reading, I think it was Stamped from the Beginning by Kendi. Pastors had a very large role in this passing down of the appropriate narrative. Because he follows like a few different people who really like sort of affected the flow of how African Americans are treated in American society, and Cotton Mather was one of them.
He
was a preacher. So like the narrative was shaped by, I guess, you guys. So
definitely. William Jennings, who wrote his commentary on Acts, also wrote a book called The Christian Imagination, but he talks about how back in Portugal in the 1500s that theologians were involved in trying to create a theology of race in order to justify the economic exploitation that they wanted to do. So it was like, okay, well, these people aren't really in the great chain of being. They can't be as Christian as somebody else because they're not white, basically. And that theology then affected both the Spanish conquest of South America and the English conquest of North America. So, yeah, no, that's very true. The church in the quote New World definitely had a role in creating a theology that would support manifest destiny and slavery. Yeah. Other comments, reflections, either on this story or, whoops.
Miriam does have a comment.
Yeah, do you mind reading that?
Sure. Miriam says the UDC, which I can't remember what the U is, but the Daughters of Confederacy was alive and well when I was a kid. Grandmothers, greats, all of mine were members. My textbooks were full of their meanness, yet I loved all of them.
Yeah, that's a hard thing growing up in the South, when you get some perspective on, yeah, I mean, a lot of people have family and who had clan members or, Uncle Benny, and how do you reconcile, whatever memories you have of that person with the hateful policies they supported? We're still living that right now. I mean, that's why you have so much conversation about, when I go home for Thanksgiving and I have have to talk to a crazy Uncle Ronnie who is convinced that, Jewish space lasers exist or something. So, yeah, it's a tough situation, right? And it also makes it clear this is lived out stuff. This isn't abstract out there stuff. You don't have to scratch too deep. It comes home pretty quick. Yeah. I remember growing up in our 5th or 6th grade, it wasn't our textbook, but the book was still in the library, the one that's about Alabama history that wrote, and it talked about, I remember looking at it. It was all about states' rights. And when we would have those conversations about history in school, inevitably someone would say, oh, it wasn't really about slavery, it was about states' rights. Yeah.
Teresa has a comment.
Yeah.
She says, seems like someone whose whole job is to make sure mom and baby live would be averse to killing babies as a general thing anyway. Hearing it discussed as civil disobedience always surprises Teresa, because I mean, they were midwives refusing to murder babies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the bit that's I think is both interesting and a little uncomfortable, is that they're described as Hebrew midwives. I don't know that we necessarily know what their job was. If they're in charge of women's reproductive health, I'm sure they had knowledge and skills about abortion, and and when we look through the history of ancient peoples, infanticide was not uncommon. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is weird. I mean, obviously the joy of being a midwife is delivering a healthy baby, but I even think it's interesting that it says Moses' mom looked at him and said, oh, he's healthy and beautiful, right? So she hid him for 3 months. It's almost like she could have considered the alternative. Do you hear what I'm saying? So, yes, abortion is not infanticide, but I'm just saying, like, ancient cultures, was not uncommon for babies to be abandoned, right? And it was a practical matter of, can our family support another mouth to feed? Why? Yes or no? And especially,
yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There's also the idea of, like, sorry.
Yeah, to me, I don't know. I heard Teresa talking about something else a little bit different here, but I mean, and Teresa, feel free.
Mhm.
But I latched on to the reference to civil disobedience, right? Like the whole idea here, so yeah, notwithstanding the likelihood that in the ancient world, the bar of survival being what it is, the way that babies are being curated is going to
Mhm.
be different. um what strikes me here is this idea that there's such an expectation of deference to authority
Mhm.
that their willingness to act contrary counts as civil disobedience, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah.
just doing what they do,
Right.
right? It's like the whole thing about don't be mad at the alligator, if he's eating you. He's just doing what he does.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and
the
Teresa says right here, civil disobedience. Pharaoh should not have expected them to go along with the
Oh,
plan,
right. Right.
right? Like
they
what?
were literally enslaved.
Yeah. Well, and their answer, I always find their answer really funny and fascinating because they're like, well, the Hebrew women are just vigorous. They're just popping them out. We can't get there in
They're
time.
just popping them out. We can't even get there in time.
And Pharaoh is
But
so
he's so dumb, right? He's so
yes.
dumb that he believes that.
It's like
Men.
the men right
Or
now
he's
trying to
not willing to like go in there and like do anything himself. You know,
yeah.
it
He's got yeah, I think you're dealing with a guy who's a leader of the Egyptian empire. He doesn't know how babies are made or how they come out. Probably. I mean, he's like these guys who think, all kinds of crazy things about women's anatomy and they're writing legislation about it. He's got no idea.
We recognize, certainly as presented in the story, when we recognize how relatively easy it is to circumvent his orders and how there appears to be a pan-Egyptian Hebrew conspiracy to do that.
Yeah.
Um, your comparisons to the present day are really striking because it does feel like, I mean, when you think again about the act of forgetting, the willful forgetting, the malicious erasure, it's Pharaoh Ron DeSantis. It really is. Like, that's what we're dealing with here is Pharaoh Ron DeSantis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anything else we want to say about that, or are we done?
I mean, I think there's something to be appreciated in the sort of parallel knowledge streams. There's Pharaoh who wants people who wants people to forget about Joseph and
Mm-hmm.
wants these babies killed. But then there's also the midwives
Mm-hmm.
who know ways, that they I don't know. There's a few interesting books about like sort of the parallel women's health
Mm-hmm.
science of sort of the medical establishment and women taking care of women
Mm-hmm.
in the past. Was it one of them was like unwell woman, and then there's also birthing a slave
Mm.
because that was back when uh reproducing slave reproduction became very important because there was no more like transatlantic trade.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they got very focused on gynecological health.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but like before that, a lot of slave women were sort of doing it themselves. Like there
Yeah.
was somebody around who knew, like, hey, take this, it feels better, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's hopeful to know that this knowledge still exists
Mm-hmm.
so far. We just have to
Teresa
make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Teresa has interesting further comments here talking about, so this goes back to the idea of not, the idiotic expectation that people are going to go along with Pharaoh's plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
She says, it's like expecting teachers to betray their students. Why do
Mm.
you think they're teaching? Not to uphold the state, but to educate. And she says, if we're talking about Florida, that's why teachers there are leaving the state.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I was just going to bring that back to the trust theme,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because something else that we haven't really remarked on in the story from Exodus that I think really illustrates the magnitude of the conspiracy against Pharaoh, right? like when they put Moses in the basket, it's like, if you do that, are you expecting that, and you're expecting like Egyptians to find him? Well, if the Egyptians look at him and say, "Oh, look at this little Hebrew boy," well, you know what Pharaoh said, and then they're just going to drown him in the river. You have zero expectation of them doing that. Plan illustrates, which there was already an underground railroad of Hebrew babies. Like nobody was obeying Pharaoh. I think this whole story is predicated on the idea that nobody was obeying Pharaoh.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of Pharaoh's arrogance is he expects to have these godlike powers, which is essentially what Pharaoh is supposed to be, right? God's representative among human beings. And that everyone, of course, is just going to do what he says. And so I think, Teresa, you're right. I mean, to highlight the idea, the arrogance that women whose job is to be midwives are going to do what he asks is just part of the story. He's just what for I'm not going to cuss, but what a jerk, you know?
Even his daughter thought that killing babies was kind of
that's a little beyond the pale, Dad. There's also the irony of the fact that Moses' mama actually did technically what he said to do, which is to put the baby in the Nile, right? She did it. But okay, fine. Yes. What do you say?
The law.
Yes. Follow the letter of the law, if not the spirit. I put the baby in the river. Yeah. I do. I think that is a good illustration, and it's also a great illustration of how, I mean, like we haven't seen this over the last few years, how stupid leaders can be. Like why do we think that just because someone's Pharaoh or someone got elected to office that they are actually competent to lead, right? How do these morons become leaders of people? Accident of birth, what I mean, obviously, and doing these stupid things that the people are going to reject. I mean, how much has someone, and not to use him as a whipping boy, but he's a great example. How much has DeSantis hurt Florida, hurt the people of Florida, right? With these stupid policies, economically, socially, spiritually. What are you doing? And I think, maybe as readers, I'm thinking of through the years, as Jewish people reading the story of their ancestors, maybe they would be thinking like, what an idiot. Anyway, the crisis of leadership is also a common theme in Hebrew scripture, right? All these kings. Why are these people kings? How did we get stuck with these people? Was it our fault? I don't know. Oh my God, look what they're doing. I mean, that's like the Jewish writers are always going like, can you get a load of this guy? Anyway, the human condition. Anyway, all right. So thank you all for a wonderful discussion. Let me go ahead and pull up our liturgy and we can wrap up here. And thank you all for your wonderful contributions. Let's see. Here we go.
All right. A closing prayer from Catherine of Siena from the 14th century. Eternal Trinity, you are like a deep sea in which the more I seek, the more I find. And the more I find, the more eagerly I seek. You fill the soul, yet never fully satisfy it. The soul continues to hunger and thirst for you, desiring you, longing to see you who are the source of all light. In your light, eternal Trinity, I have seen into the deep ocean of your love and have rejoiced in the beauty of your creation. You are goodness beyond all goodness, beauty beyond all beauty, wisdom beyond all wisdom. You are the garment that covers all nakedness. You are the food that satisfies all hunger. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you everyone for attending today, and thank you for such a rich discussion. Again, if you've been watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you don't mind, just leave a comment or click like so we have a way to count your presence with us today. I'm going to stop the stream if you're on Zoom. If you don't mind, hang around for a few seconds more.